Charged Up, Episode 13, The Philosophy of Life Planning.
Are you ready to get charged up about your money, your credit, and your overall financial health? You've come to the right place. You're listening to Charged Up with Jenny Hoff.
Welcome to Charged Up. I'm your host, Jenny Hoff, and a managing editor at CreditCards.com, where we have financial experts dedicating their time to helping readers and listeners get out of debt and master their credit. Today, we are talking to the master of the life planning movement, George Kinder. As the founder of the Kinder Institute of Life Planning, he is not only a financial advisor of more than 30 years, but also a mindfulness teacher. Unlike many financial planners, he digs deeper and looks for what you really want in life before you start planning how to get there. With thousands of life planners around the world, Kinder created a movement, and today he'll share with us the 3 most important questions you need to ask yourself so you can make your money work for you and your life goals. So let's get charged up about planning our lives. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Very nice to be here.
So first I want to talk a little bit about your background. You take a very spiritual approach to money management and understanding finances. You're considered the father of the life planning movement, which I want to discuss in a moment. But first, can you talk a little bit about your background and how this came to be? What did you find was missing in the discussion over our financial lives?
Spiritual is certainly something that can be involved in our work. But I think, personally, I think it's more about freedom and layers of freedom. What's really missing in discussions about money is what is the purpose of money? You know, we think that we need to earn more on our investments, we need to reduce our taxes, we need to save if we're, trying to do an estate plan, we need to address our budget. And what happens in financial advice is we forget what the real purpose is. All of those things are helpful. It's certainly helpful to have a sensible relationship to money. But what we really want is we want our lives to be just rich and fulfilled and fun and meaningful and engaged and profound. And so the questions that I teach, the way that I teach financial advisors to work with their clients, it's all about what does freedom mean to you? What would actually give you freedom in your life? And the spiritual aspect, it's simply one of 5 different areas that come out of people's response, and it's a fairly common one. After family, I think the most important thing to people has to do with their values or their spirit or explicit religious practices. So, not for everybody, but it's after family. It tends to be the second most important thing.
And how did that come about with you? Because you have an interesting background, a strong financial background, but from what I understand, you also have a bit of this spiritual background when it comes to meditation. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you were able to combine that in your own mind as well?
I've been a teacher of mindfulness meditation practices for 30 years. And over that time, I've also led many week-long, silent, mindfulness-based meditation retreats. How it came about early on for me was that I would have actually preferred to live a life more as an artist and as a spiritual practitioner than as a financial person. But I had to make a living like most of us. And my skills were in mathematical and economic areas. And so I dived into tax work and then developed a financial planning practice and then became a money manager over time. And then eventually, because the way I worked with clients, had great respect for what they might be missing in their lives. I mean, my experience with most of my clients was that when you got beneath the money aspect of the taxes or the investments, they really wanted something out of their lives that they weren't quite delivering. And my passion became, as it was for my personal life, it became, how can I help this person to deliver that? That's what's really important. How do we shift the focus? We're not just talking about the numbers, but we're talking about what they really want. And then that will make my work as a financial person much more accurate, because I'll know whether they can tie up their money for a period of time or they can't. I'll know if they really want to buy this expensive, large house, or that buying a house at all would harm what they really are passionate about, which is having a great relationship with their family or playing jazz in a club on Tuesday night. So I became much more interested in people's understandings of what freedom meant to them. And that's really what finance should be all about.
I really love that philosophy. I think that a lot of times we don't actually take that moment to think about what we want and why do we want the money for that reason. And we think, well, we have to buy the house, we have to buy the car because everybody else is, as opposed to what gives us actual pleasure. So I want to talk a little bit about your institute. You have the Kinder Institute of Life Planning. Talk about how that's different from just financial planning. Sometimes we think, okay, we need a financial advisor on financial planning. And you talked about it now a little bit about how you want to bring in life goals when doing financial planning.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about life planning?
The way we understand life planning is that, just as I was just describing it, it's something that has to happen before you start to think about and talk about the financial pieces. Otherwise, you don't know what the budget is for, or you don't know what the investments are for, and therefore you're likely to make mistakes, and you're likely to be holding yourself back from what you really care about. So the Kinder Institute of Life Planning does something for consumers. It does something for advisors. It trains advisors in a life planning methodology that we call EVOKE, which is a 5-step process that we take our clients through, so that we're confident that as we deliver the financial aspect of life planning, which is the final bit, that it's going to deliver freedom for the client. So we train the financial advisory community primarily in the first 3 phases of EVOKE, which are what sometimes people call life planning, just that first 3 phases of financial planning. And they have to do with, first of all, building a great relationship with the client so that they love talking with you and sharing who they want to be. They feel trust toward you, and that's a major issue these days with in our world, period, but also particularly with financial advisors. So we train them in great listening skills, and then the second phase of that life planning engagement is what we call vision. And EVOKE is an acronym, so E stands for exploration and V stands for vision. And in the vision meeting, we have an engaged conversation talking about what it would be most exciting, what would be the most exciting life for a client and the most meaningful life. And we have a series of questions and exercises that get at that. And then the third meeting is the obstacles meeting, where we deal with the obstacles to that life. So for consumers, we provide a list of 3,000 financial advisors all over the world. We're actually in 30 countries on 6 continents who have gone through our program. For financial advisors, we provide training so that they can address these issues with clients.
And so part of life planning, I believe, from what I understand reading your work, is asking the right questions. And I've read in a couple of pieces that you talk about 3 main questions that you encourage people to ask themselves regarding their life's goals and values. What are those questions, and why are they important for us to think about? What will the answers teach us?
The 3 questions are one of a series of exercises. We have, I think, 4 major exercises in the vision aspect of life planning. And the 3 questions are the ones that are most famous. And they start off with just a question really about money, that if you had all the money that you needed for the rest of your life, what would you do? And, it's like winning the lottery, or, you may not be as rich as the Queen of England, but you're well enough off that you can do what you need in your life, need to do, feel called to do. And so that's a wonderful question to play with. The 3 questions we do them in order. And so the first one allows you to really look at all the different things that would be fun, engaging, exciting, profound, meaningful, touching for yourself in your life, filled with accomplishment or success, or however you define it. The second question goes really significantly deeper, and it's a question that if you suddenly discovered you only had 5 to 10 years left to live, what would shift for you? How would you live your life then? What would you do? And of course, when we're faced with our mortality, we begin to think differently. And so the questions, they may overlap the first question, the answers may overlap, but they're often more personal, more deep, and in some way more important. Very often family and relationship comes up, not always, but very often. And then the other thing that comes up are the areas where you feel a commitment to some kind of personal legacy for yourself. So it's deeper, it's more important, and these are the things that are really urgent to be done, and they're things that we focus on in the life plan. But the third question is the question that is the most important question of all for most of us, and it goes even deeper. And it's if you were suddenly told by your doctor that you had an illness that has come to term, and you only have 24 hours left to live, and you were completely shocked by this, and reflecting on all the things you'd wanted to accomplish in your life, all the things you'd anticipated doing, what did you miss? Who did you not get to be? What did you not get to do? And it's that question that is really the heart of the life plan, because that question is the life or death question. It's the question of meaning. And again, the areas that come up, the most significant area for most people is family or relationship. The second most significant one is what we call values or spirit. The third most significant one was a surprise to me, and that is creativity. People are enormously creative, long to be more creative than they've been. Sometimes that's with business, but often it's with the arts and with culture. The fourth most common response has to do with giving back to community, and the fifth most common response has something to do with our relationship to our environment. It could be just we live in the city, we want to live in the country, or vice versa, or it could be concern about planet Earth. So those are the 5 things that tend to come up. And those are the things that we craft then a financial plan around. And when you do that, when you really tap into the meaning of a person's life and you bring the finances to bear on that, the client or the consumer is so excited. They're so thrilled. They have so much more energy in their life because they're addressing what's really important to them, and they're making it happen. And we make sure that these things occur, most of them occur within 1 or 2 years.
Oh, wow. So you take in then all of the things that they say that they would have really missed out on, and the things that they would have been a tragedy that they didn't get to do. And that's how you craft the life plan. Can you give us an example? So then how would we then craft our life plan? Would it be how you invest your money, how you save your money, how you spend your money? Can you give us an idea of that?
Yeah, well, first of all, let's take a person, let's say they wanted to go to Africa. Maybe they wanted to move to Africa, and that they wanted a better relationship with their 6-year-old, and maybe they wanted to live with more integrity, more honesty in their life somehow. So the Africa piece is pretty clearly a question that would involve finances and would involve planning and budgeting. And do they have the appropriate saving? Could they actually do this? And what would the economics be in Africa? So it involves strategic planning and scenario planning around their savings, their investment, their income and expenses. The question about their 6-year-old son is more personal, but in some ways it's more urgent because it's carrying a burden on them every day, most likely, if they're engaged with their son on a regular basis, but they don't have that. So that's something that we actually help to inspire them to get moving on right away. And we'll actually talk about what are you going to do tomorrow, and what are you going to do this week, and how would you, and how much time do you need to make that happen, and when would it occur, and what would be enough? So we look at that, and of course there are some financial ramifications there. If you need more time in your life, if you needed an additional 20 hours a week, for instance, that would clearly edge into quite significantly perhaps into your work life. So there could be economic significance, but there might not be. If there isn't, then the thing that's going to happen is that you're going to get a lot more energy by solving it. There's going to be a lot more energy for your economic life. And then the third piece about maybe having more integrity or honesty, they may be caught in a job, say they're in a sales job where they feel that they're leading a client toward a sale, but sometimes they're not sure that it's really the very best thing for that client. Well, then we'd be looking at what's happening with their job, and if there's a way to craft that job in a way that has greater authenticity or greater integrity to it, or if there are alternative professions that they would feel more inspired by. So all of those things clearly have to do with finances. The one that's most explicit there is the Africa. But it could be that if you decide you want to move your job, that once again, this question of retirement savings and what is your savings for, where you live and how you're managing your budget, all of those things can be very important in times of transition. But then also if you shift jobs, you shift profession, you're shifting them probably for decades. And so there's implications in terms of long-term planning as well there.
That's great. So yeah, it really shows how it's all intertwined, and even things that you think have nothing to do with money could end up having to do with money and your work and how you have to think about it. Let's talk about somebody who maybe doesn't have much money to even go see a financial advisor. Perhaps they're in debt, severe debt, and they just want to build a secure financial future rather than living paycheck to paycheck. What would you say to them? What questions would you ask them to help get them on the right track?
Fantastic. First of all, I would say to them, I'm 100% with you. I can see why you feel challenged by this and why you feel this is terribly important. Let's make it happen. First thing I do is really give them encouragement, and they know that I'm on their side and we're going to do it. And then I'd say, that what I've discovered over time is that the very best way to accomplish this is to start off by thinking, who is it that I want to be and where is it that I want to go? And once we have that arrived at, then we can look at, well, what is the financing going to be of having that trajectory in my life? And what are both the financial requirements, what are the income and the expenses that are likely to be there, as well as the requirements for that. So once we have that, then we can get down and look at the practical aspects of reducing the debt, of increasing your income, perhaps reducing expenses, all of that.
Okay, so it's really, again, people just it's about focusing on the right questions, about knowing where you want to go before you start a plan on how to get there. What do you think most of us are missing in our lives when it comes to really understanding how our money should be working for us?
I think most of us don't pay enough attention to what freedom means for us. There are certainly elements of finance that we all could learn more from. But I'd say the first thing is, what does freedom really mean for us? And that's the life planning piece. And then I think probably the second most important thing is, where can we find great advice and advice we can trust? There's a huge amount of conversation right now in the press about the fiduciary rule having to do with pensions, and this question of, should advisors have a fiduciary obligation to their clients. And most people in America don't even know what fiduciary means, I suspect. And even in the press, I don't think that they're understanding it fully, because most of the definitions of fiduciary has to do with how advisors earn their fees and whether there's a conflict of interest between the advice they give and the products that they're offering or selling. And I think that's part of what fiduciary means. But fiduciary really means a really trusted relationship with the client, and that trusted relationship should go right to the bone marrow of the consumer, that there should be a heart-to-heart, a mentor-like relationship between a financial advisor and a client. And right now, the trust level toward financial advisors is so low from the years and years that advisors have primarily been salespeople, and even doubled up and made much worse by the banking crisis of 8 years ago. So I'd say the second most important thing is, how do you actually find a financial advisor who you can trust? And fiduciary is one of the key words to it.
Okay, a fiduciary is somebody who's going to be working in your best interest, right? And not necessarily, like you said, having a conflict of interest where they can make more money off of a different suggestion.
Yeah, that's the classic definition. Most people who call themselves fiduciary will have that. I would argue that in addition, you can't possibly be a fiduciary without doing life planning. A lot of people who call themselves fiduciaries are not life planners, and I think that's a failure of understanding the term.
So what can listeners do right now to feel more confident about money management, to take the advice that we give in this podcast and advice that they get elsewhere and put it into practice right now?
We have a completely free, there's no ads on it, completely free consumer website called lifeplanningforyou.com, and they can go to that website, and if they cannot afford to hire a financial life planner, they can go to that website and do a pretty good job of their own financial life plan on that website. Once they have that in hand, then if they were to go to a financial advisor, a financial planner who is a fiduciary, I think they could really do a pretty terrific job with their financial work.
Could they do it on their own, in a sense? Are there tools out there where they can figure it out on their own if they're just not in a financial place to hire anybody at the moment?
I think there are many tools now online. Many of the robo-advisors do very low-cost, high-quality investing. So there's a way of doing the investment piece online, and then more and more, and I suspect you and your podcast will have more of the financial tools that are available also online for general financial planning.
I also want to ask about spending money. What kind of things can we do to spend money with a purpose instead of just spending money? You mentioned it might not be in your best interest to buy a house because that might impede on what your real desires are. So how can we spend money with a purpose and know that we're actually fulfilling those life goals?
I think the first thing is not isolating the question to a transaction. I think that if we discover what our purpose is and we are on fire to accomplish it, then I think every single purchase that we make is spending money with a purpose. Shopping for groceries, paying the rent, everything that we do is filled with that purpose. And that's where I would aim rather than looking at individual purchases.
All right. And finally, our podcast is called Charged Up. What charges you up about helping people create both life plans and financial plans, or rather life planning?
What charges me up is that this is really a movement that's happening. There are 3,000 people in 30 countries and on 6 continents, and each of them probably has as many as 100 clients. So you're talking about 300,000 people every year that are learning to live with greater freedom. So what really charges me up is that people coming out of a life planning engagement are fired up about being who they really want to be, rather than being lost in the kind of the morass of financial detail.
All right. Good note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Jenny, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
And thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us on iTunes. And if you have feedback or questions that you want me to answer on air, send me an email at chargedup@CreditCards.com. You can also find the full transcript of this episode as well as all of our previous episodes at CreditCards.com. Until next time, get charged up about your financial future.